In the early months of 1942, the American public was drowning in a steady stream of devastating news. Pearl Harbor lay in smoking ruins, and the Philippines were falling to a rapid, highly coordinated offensive. Over a few short months, Japanese forces had established a powerful aura of military invincibility. They advanced seemingly unchecked across the Pacific, insulated by a geographic buffer that left their leadership certain of one thing: the Japanese home islands could never be reached by an enemy strike. President Franklin D. Roosevelt demanded a solution. He mandated a direct strike on Japan itself, an operation designed entirely to puncture that myth of vulnerability and give a reeling American public some proof that they could fight back. A strike on Tokyo served a single overriding purpose: injecting hope into a nation that was beginning to fear the war was already lost. But Roosevelt's mandate collided with a massive logistical wall: the sheer expanse of the Pacific Ocean. This map of the Pacific highlights the core issue facing the military. The standard aircraft carried by Navy ships had incredibly short flight ranges. To get those planes close enough to hit Japan, the aircraft carriers themselves would have to sail deep into hostile waters, exposing the most valuable ships in the fleet to certain destruction. The United States did have aircraft with the flight range to cross that ocean gap, heavy land-based bombers. But those massive planes required long, sprawling concrete runways to generate enough speed for takeoff, space that an aircraft carrier deck simply did not have. By 1942 standards, these variables were irreconcilable. To reach Japan, a plane needed a runway that the Navy simply couldn't provide at sea. That is, until Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle proposed a deeply counterintuitive workaround. Doolittle suggested taking heavy Army B-25 bombers, aircraft designed exclusively for land, and modifying them to launch from a Navy carrier deck. The plan required crews to strip the bombers of excess weight and practice taking off on a fraction of their normal runway length. And because a B-25 could never land back onto a ship, the carrier USS Hornet would drop them within range of Japan, and the planes would have to keep flying all the way to friendly airfields in China. There was no return trip programmed into this operation. Doolittle's design turned a standard bombing run into a desperate, one-way gamble, entirely dependent on strict fuel management. On April 18, 1942, that gamble collided with reality. A Japanese picket boat spotted the American task force much earlier than anticipated. This created an immediate crisis. To protect the carrier, Doolittle was forced to launch his aircraft over 150 miles farther away from Japan than originally planned. The math was sudden and brutal. The bombers were burning the exact fuel they needed to reach their safe landing zones in China. Loaded with bombs and extra gas cans, all 16 massive aircraft fought their way into the air from a violently pitching deck surrounded by heavy ocean swells. Every single bomber successfully cleared the ship, but by choosing to launch 150 miles early, Doolittle cemented the mission's trajectory. They were airborne, but they were flying towards certain physical disaster. The crews reached their targets in Tokyo and several other cities. They dropped their payload successfully, though the actual physical destruction to the industrial centers was relatively modest. As the 16 planes turned toward China, the early launch caught up with them. The engines began to sputter exactly as the fuel calculations predicted. Not a single aircraft reached the intended airfields. In the dark, in terrible weather, the crews were forced to bail out or crash land across occupied and free Chinese territory. It was a 100% loss of American hardware. Looking at the scattered wreckage of all 16 planes, Doolittle was convinced the entire operation had been a catastrophic waste. He told his crew he fully expected to face a court-martial as soon as he returned home. While the bombs themselves left only minor craters, they punctured the Japanese High Command's absolute certainty that their homeland was out of reach. The embarrassment triggered a brutal reaction. To punish the Chinese civilians who aided the surviving American airmen, Japan launched the Zhejiang campaign, a retaliatory sweep that killed an estimated 250,000 people. Meanwhile, back in the United States, news of the successful strike caused civilian morale to skyrocket. Rather than a court-martial, Jimmy Doolittle was promoted and awarded the Medal of Honor. The operation failed every standard metric of tactical success, But the overwhelming domestic celebration proved that the mission's value was entirely psychological. That psychological impact soon rippled onto the battlefield. Panicked by the vulnerability of their homeland, Japanese leadership abruptly moved critical fighter squadrons and resources intended for other fronts back to defend their own cities. Driven by the urgent need to ensure American carriers could never launch another surprise attack, Japan accelerated their timetable for a massive naval offensive. That rushed operation led directly into a trap at the Battle of Midway just weeks later, a catastrophic defeat that permanently crippled the Japanese fleet. The 16 bombers of the Doolittle raid never made it back, but by turning a tactical disaster into a psychological weapon, that single operation bought America the strategic momentum it needed to win the Pacific War.